studio lights were warm that morning, filling the air with a soft golden glow. The audience inside the ABC studio was buzzing with excitement, whispering to one another and waiting for the show to start. The cameras were already in place, the crew moving quietly around the set. It was another episode of The View, and the producers knew this one would draw attention. Keanu Reeves was on the guest list. Everyone seemed to feel a certain calm anticipation. Keanu had that effect on people. His name alone brought a quiet kind of energy to the room, a mix of curiosity and respect. For years, audiences had loved him not just for his movies, but for who he was. A gentle soul in a world of loud voices. As the theme music started, the hosts took their seats smiling for the camera, and the audience broke into applause. Keanu appeared from the backstage area, dressed simply in a dark blazer and his signature boots. The crowd clapped louder when he waved, that familiar shy smile appearing on his face. He didn't walk with the confidence of someone showing off. Instead, he moved like someone who had been in countless interviews and still found them a little strange. He greeted the hosts with warmth, shaking hands and thanking them for having him on. Behar, one of the co-hosts, greeted him with a wide grin. She had always been known for her sharp wit and blunt opinions. The two of them couldn't be more different in personality. She was fiery, outspoken, and never afraid to push a conversation further than most would dare. Keanu was calm, thoughtful, and known for thinking before he spoke. The interview began lightheartedly. The hosts congratulated Keanu on his latest film, a mix of action and deep emotion that had recently been released. He spoke with quiet enthusiasm about the project, about how lucky he felt to keep doing what he loved. He talked about the team behind the scenes, the directors, the stunt coordinators, the writers. He praised everyone else before even mentioning his own role. That humility was something the audience instantly responded to. As he spoke, he leaned forward slightly, his hands folded together. His voice was gentle but carried enough strength to hold the room's attention. He smiled at the jokes, laughed softly when one of the hosts teased him about his action scenes, and even told a story about how he still did most of his own stunts, though his knees complained about it more than they used to. The audience laughed warmly, but beneath the laughter, there was something else building, a small shift in tone that only the producers might have noticed at first. When Joy began steering the conversation away from the movie and into Keanu's personal outlook on life, the atmosphere subtly changed. "So, Keanu," Joy began, her tone friendly but with a spark behind it, "you've said in interviews before that kindness is one of the most important things to you. In fact, I think you called it the most radical act left in show business. That's quite a statement. What did you mean by that?" Keanu smiled, a little hesitant at first. "I just meant that the world can be hard," he said. "And in this industry, or in any industry, people are under a lot of pressure to perform, to compete, to be something bigger than themselves. But kindness, and simple kindness, can change how we move through the world. It can change how we treat one another." The audience nodded. Some even clapped softly. It was a sentiment that fit his personality perfectly. He wasn't trying to make a grand statement. It sounded like something he truly believed, but Joy wasn't ready to move on just yet. "Sure," she said, tilting her head, "but don't you think that's a bit, I don't know, idealistic? Hollywood isn't exactly known for kindness. It's politics, money, and survival, right?" Keanu took a moment before answering. "Maybe," he said, still calm. "But even in a tough place, you can still choose how you act." "I think that choice matters," Joy raised her eyebrows. "But don't you think staying out of the hard conversations and about politics, about what's right and wrong, is part of the problem? You have this big platform, and people listen to you. Shouldn't actors use that for something more than kindness?" There it was, the spark. It wasn't hostile yet, but the tension was there. The other hosts glanced at each other. One of them gently tried to redirect, but Joy was already leaning in, ready for a debate. Keanu smiled politely, though his expression softened. "I just think everyone has their own path," he said. "For me, I try to focus on empathy and respect. I don't think shouting opinions makes anyone kinder. I just hope people can feel something good when they watch my work." It was a graceful answer, but it didn't satisfy Joy. "But isn't that a little safe?" she pressed. "People want honesty from public figures now. You've got millions of fans. Don't they deserve to know what you really stand for?" Keanu nodded slowly, his eyes gentle but firm. "They do," he said. And what I stand for is compassion. That's not political, it's human. The audience clapped again, louder this time. Some smiled at the quiet wisdom of his response. But Joy's expression didn't soften. She was a professional at creating moments that stirred conversation, and she could sense that this one was catching attention. The segment continued, but the energy had shifted. The hosts asked more questions about Keanu's film, about his experiences over the years, but every so often, Joy brought it back to his worldview. She seemed determined to get him to say something more controversial, while Keanu kept steering the answers back toward peace and humanity. At one point, one of the other hosts asked about how he stayed grounded in an industry that often pulled people in different directions. Keanu laughed lightly. Well, he said, I take the bus sometimes. I try to remember what life feels like outside of the spotlight. I ride my bike, I talk to strangers. It's not complicated. I just try to live like everyone else. The audience laughed again, and the atmosphere lightened for a few minutes. His ability to stay calm, even when the energy shifted, was something that people admired. But Joy, still leaning forward, hadn't let go of her earlier point. So, she said after a pause, you don't see yourself as a political person at all? Keanu shook his head softly. Not really. I see myself as a person who's trying to learn and grow. I think the world has enough people telling others what to think. I'd rather listen. Joy let out a small laugh, though it didn't sound entirely amused. That's an interesting take, she said. But some would say silence is also a statement. Don't you think by staying neutral you're taking a side? The air felt heavier now. The laughter faded, replaced by that unmistakable tension that fills a live studio when something unscripted begins to unfold. Keanu shifted in his seat, not defensively but with quiet discomfort. His eyes stayed gentle, though steady, patient, kind. I don't see it as silence, he said. I just see it as trying to be peaceful. There's so much noise in the world. I don't want to add to it. For a moment, the studio was still. It wasn't a dramatic silence, but the kind that happens when people aren't sure how to react. The audience didn't know whether to clap again or wait to see what came next. Joy leaned back, crossing her arms with a thoughtful expression, and the show moved on to a lighter topic, or at least tried to. One of the other hosts asked him about his favorite scenes to film, and Keanu immediately brightened up. He talked about working with his stunt team, about how much joy he found in collaboration. He mentioned a moment on set where a prop had malfunctioned, and instead of getting frustrated, the whole crew ended up laughing about it. It reminded me, he said, smiling, that we're all just people trying to do something we love. That line got applause. It was the kind of thing audiences loved about him. Genuine, humble, free from ego. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He just told stories the way they happened. As the segment neared its end, the crew signaled a commercial break. The hosts smiled for the camera as the theme music played again. The audience clapped, the cameras cut, and Keanu leaned back in his chair, exhaling quietly. He didn't look upset, more thoughtful than anything else. He sipped his water, smiled politely as a producer gave him a thumbs up, and thanked the makeup artist who adjusted his mic. Joy glanced over at him and smiled, too, a small, almost private smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was known for her boldness, and Keanu was known for his grace. They had simply met in the middle of two very different worlds, hers filled with argument and opinion, his filled with reflection and calm. Outside the camera's view, the audience still whispered among themselves, replaying the moment in their minds. Some thought Joy had gone too far. Others admired her for asking tough questions. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. Keanu's quiet responses had carried more weight than loud words ever could. He had come on the show to talk about a movie. But what people would remember was how he handled the conversation. Not with anger, not with avoidance, but with something that felt rare in that setting. Patience. By the time the commercial ended, the tension had eased again. The next guest was waiting backstage, and the show continued with its usual rhythm. But something about that brief exchange lingered in the air, an invisible echo of two very different ways of seeing the world. Keanu finished his segment, thanked the host once again, and walked off stage quietly. He smiled at a crew member, shook a few hands, and disappeared behind the curtain. For him, it was just another interview, another morning in a busy schedule. But for everyone watching, it had been something a little more. The audience didn't know what would come next, that this small moment of polite disagreement would later grow into something much bigger. For now it was just a calm before the storm, the kind of moment that feels ordinary until you look back and realize it wasn't. After the commercial break, the studio lights flickered back to life and the set returned to its usual polished look. The audience clapped, some even cheering for the lively exchange that had just taken place. It was rare that a conversation on The View stirred so much energy. Most of the time, guests went through the usual motions of interviews, questions about their latest projects, their families, their hobbies. But today was different. There had been a spark, an unexpected turn, and people were talking about it. Joy Behar, still seated at the table, had a slight smirk on her face. She looked over at the other hosts, who seemed to be momentarily unsure about how to proceed. Whoopi Goldberg, the show's steady anchor, cleared her throat and offered a reassuring smile to the audience, signaling that they were about to move on. But Joy, always the provocateur, wasn't ready to let the tension slip away so easily. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes still on Keanu, who was now quietly talking with one of the crew members just off to the side. The next segment was supposed to be a fun one. The hosts were supposed to talk about upcoming trends in the entertainment industry, but the room wasn't quite as light as it had been before Keanu's appearance. The vibe was still buzzing with the undercurrent of what had just happened. Keanu had left a mark, not with his words, but with the calm way he handled himself. Joy was used to being the one who stirred things up. It was part of her charm, her ability to cut through the superficial and get to something real. But this time something had shifted. Keanu wasn't rattled by her questions. He hadn't backed down, but he hadn't fought either. It was as if he'd stepped aside from the chaos of it all, showing that maybe there was a better way to handle things than to always respond with more noise. The producers, meanwhile, were on edge. They'd been around long enough to know that moments like these were unpredictable. They watched the monitors, exchanged a few whispers, and kept a close eye on the clock. The show needed to go on, but the energy in the room wasn't what they expected. Keanu had been calm, almost too calm for some people. They couldn't help but wonder if the show had lost its bite, its edge. Was he too soft? Had he backed down from the kind of heated confrontation that The View was known for? But that wasn't how Keanu saw it. He didn't view the moment as a confrontation. He saw it as a conversation. And conversations for him weren't about winning or losing, and they were about listening. Sure, it had been uncomfortable. No one likes being challenged, especially in front of a live studio audience. But Keanu had learned over the years that responding with anger or frustration never really changed anything. As the show progressed, the other hosts started to ask lighter questions, steering the conversation back to Keanu's work. They were hoping to move on from the earlier tension, not because they didn't think it was interesting, but because no one really wanted to go any deeper into the awkwardness of it all. Keanu, however, didn't seem in any rush to leave behind the conversation they'd just had. Joy turned to Keanu once more, this time with a more playful tone. "So tell me, Keanu," she said, her voice lighter but with a subtle edge. "You keep talking about kindness and you seem like you're all about it, but do you ever get mad? Ever get angry? You seem so, I don't know, perfect." Keanu chuckled softly. "I'm not perfect, I can assure you," he said, shaking his head. "I get angry like anyone else, but I try not to hold on to it. It doesn't do much good, you know?" "Anger's an exhausting emotion." Joy raised her eyebrows, intrigued. "So you never lose it?" "Not once?" "No, not really," Keanu said. "I think it's more important to understand why you're angry. Sometimes you get mad because of something else. Maybe frustration, maybe fear. But if you just react to that anger without understanding it, it doesn't solve anything. You have to look at it, ask yourself why it's there, and let it go." His words hung in the air, resonating with an unexpected kind of wisdom. The audience, who had been sitting on edge moments before, now seemed a little calmer. They were still processing what had just happened earlier, but there was something about Keanu's quiet approach that put people at ease. It was as though he wasn't just talking about kindness, he was living it right in front of them. Joy, who was usually quick to challenge her guests, was momentarily silent. She looked down at her notes, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. It was clear she wasn't quite ready to accept the peaceful answer Keanu had given her. She prided herself on pushing harder, but Keanu didn't seem to be someone you could simply push. Instead, she softened her approach, leaning forward again with an almost curious expression. "That's interesting. I'm sure a lot of people could learn something from that. It's not every day you meet someone who chooses peace over conflict. Keanu smiled, but this time there was a flicker of something deeper in his eyes. It wasn't arrogance or pride, but a quiet acknowledgement that the conversation had moved into territory that wasn't so simple. He wasn't just talking about being kind in public or in his work. He was talking about something that could change the way people lived their daily lives. And that kind of talk was hard to come by in an industry that often thrived on drama and controversy. Joy, seeing the shift in the conversation, took a deep breath. "You know, Keanu," she said, "I'll give you credit. You're sticking to your guns, but I still think there's a lot of value in getting your hands dirty once in a while. I mean, if everyone just walked away from tough conversations, where would we be?" Keanu nodded thoughtfully, his hands resting on the table in front of him. "I think there's a place for tough conversations," he said. "But the way we approach them matters. If we come into a conversation just trying to win or prove we're right, we miss the point. It's about understanding where the other person is coming from." At that moment, the crew was watching closely, not just for the show's timing, but for the direction this conversation was taking. It wasn't just about the celebrity guest anymore. It was about the nature of how we communicate with one another, how we listen, how we challenge each other, and how at the end of the day kindness and understanding could make all the difference. Joy's smile softened again. She looked at Keanu for a long moment as if considering his words. There was something in the way he spoke, the way he carried himself that made her pause. Maybe he was right. Maybe there was something to be said for responding with quiet strength rather than loud confrontation. But she was Joy Behar, and it wasn't in her nature to let things go without a little nudge. She leaned in again, the playful edge in her voice returning. "All right, Keanu," she said. "But what about when someone's just plain wrong? What do you do then? Just smile and walk away?" Keanu didn't seem fazed. "I think there's always room for a conversation. I don't think walking away means avoiding the issue. It just means giving the other person space to see things from a different angle. Sometimes the best thing you can do is listen, even when you don't agree." The conversation wasn't over, but it had taken a shift. The tension that had been hanging in the air earlier had begun to dissolve, replaced by a moment of quiet reflection. The audience could feel it, the shift from confrontation to understanding, from debate to dialogue. And for Keanu, this was just another day. He wasn't interested in being part of the spectacle. He wasn't there to play the game of who could be the loudest or the most dramatic. He had come to talk, to share, and to let people see that sometimes there was more to a conversation than just words. It was about how you made people feel. As the conversation continued to unfold, the other hosts began to chime in, eager to get their own thoughts on the table. But for a few moments, everyone seemed to realize that Keanu had set the tone. It wasn't about the points you made or the arguments you won. It was about how you treated others when you didn't agree. The segment wrapped up shortly after, and the producers signaled for the next segment to begin. Keanu smiled at the hosts, thanked them again for having him, and made his way off stage. But as he walked behind the scenes, he wasn't thinking about the debate with Joy or the way the conversation had gone. He was already looking forward to the next moment, to the next person he'd meet, the next conversation he'd have. For Keanu, it was just another step in a journey he didn't quite expect, but one he would keep. The studio buzzed with a different kind of energy after Keanu left the set. The hosts, still processing the earlier exchange, began their post-segment banter, trying to smooth over the underlying tension. It wasn't every day that The View had an episode that felt like more than just another celebrity appearance. This had been a moment. Joy Behar, who'd played the role of the challenger for most of the interview, was still deep in thought. Her sharp wit had pushed Keanu in a direction she wasn't used to seeing, quiet reflection. The entire segment had been a masterclass in the art of not reacting, a trait that seemed foreign to her. She'd expected a fight, or at least a back-and-forth exchange, but instead, she had gotten calm and thoughtful responses, none of which she had been able to break through. As the commercial break ended, Joy couldn't help but feel a little unsettled. She had always prided herself on getting a rise out of her guests, but with Keanu, something different had happened. It was as if she had walked into a wall of serenity, and no matter how much she pushed, it didn't budge. Keanu's presence had somehow shifted the atmosphere in the studio, and she knew she wasn't the only one who felt it. Whoopi Goldberg, usually the moderator who could seamlessly shift the conversation in any direction, seemed more contemplative than usual. Even the other hosts, who had been quick to move on from the earlier tension, couldn't entirely shake the feeling that they had witnessed something meaningful. Something rare. Keanu, meanwhile, had retreated backstage with his usual quiet grace. He didn't see the need to analyze what had just happened. For him, this wasn't about winning or losing a debate. It was about staying true to who he was, calm, centered, and unwilling to engage in the chaos that often consumed the world around him. As he walked past the crew members backstage, a few nodded in recognition, offering him small, appreciative smiles. He wasn't the kind of person who required fanfare. He didn't need applause or accolades. He was simply doing his job, sharing a piece of himself with the world, but always with the intention to give rather than take. Back in the studio, Joy sat quietly for a moment, her gaze fixed on the spot where Keanu had been seated. The crew was ready to move on to the next segment, but something kept her from fully diving into the next topic. She glanced at Whoopi, who was waiting for the cue to start. The other hosts were clearly eager to lighten the mood with a different segment, but Joy wasn't quite done with the earlier conversation. It wasn't that she had lost, but more that she felt there was something she hadn't fully unpacked. As the next guest, a popular TV star, prepared to join the panel, Joy found herself once again thinking about the way Keanu had handled the interview. She had gone in expecting to poke, prod, and challenge him, but he had met her with a kind of stillness that left her without the usual snappy retorts she could rely on. She wasn't used to being caught off guard, and for the first time in a long time, she found herself reflecting more than she had intended. Maybe there's something to what he said, Joy muttered to herself. Just loud enough for Whoopi to hear. About kindness? Whoopi replied, her voice steady but warm. Joy shrugged. I don't know. I mean, the whole thing felt a little too nice, you know? I kept trying to push him, but he just didn't react the way I thought he would. Whoopi smiled knowingly. Keanu's not like the other guests, Joy. He's different. Not all battles need to be fought. Joy raised an eyebrow. I'm not sure what to make of that. But you're right, he didn't fight. He just stayed calm. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. Maybe that's the point. You don't always have to engage. Sometimes silence is louder than words. The rest of the segment proceeded with its usual light banter, but in the back of Joy's mind, the conversation with Keanu lingered. She couldn't shake the sense that there had been something powerful in his quiet responses, something that made her think about the way she approached conversations, and maybe even the way she approached life. The following days after the interview were filled with clips and sound bites from the show. Footage of Keanu's calm demeanor went viral across social media. Fans and critics alike seemed captivated by how composed he had been in the face of Joy's relentless questioning. The internet exploded with people sharing their thoughts, some applauding Keanu for his patience and wisdom, while others sided with Joy, saying she had merely been doing her job by asking tough questions. But one thing was clear. The conversation had made people think. It had sparked discussions, both online and offline, about how we engage with one another, especially in a world that often rewards confrontation and drama. Many felt that Keanu had shown a different way, one where standing firm didn't mean raising your voice, but choosing not to raise your fists. The media buzz continued for days, with some outlets focusing on the debate over whether Keanu had been too nice or whether Joy had pushed too hard. There were even think pieces written about the cultural significance of the interview, exploring how celebrity interviews often revolve around getting a reaction, and how Keanu had completely subverted that expectation. Meanwhile, Keanu went on with his life just as he always had. He didn't feel the need to comment on the interview, or respond to the thousands of opinions swirling around him. He had made his point, and it had resonated with people who appreciated his perspective. That was enough. Behind the scenes, the producers of The View were quietly discussing the aftermath of the segment. It had been an intense moment, one that hadn't been planned or scripted. It had taken a life of its own, and the producers were unsure of how the rest of the season would unfold after such a high-profile exchange. But even they couldn't deny that there was something special about what had transpired. For once, the show had become more than just a platform for sound bites. It had become a space for reflection, for genuine conversation. As the next taping approached, the team was preparing for a more traditional episode. They were eager to get back into the usual rhythm, but they also knew that things couldn't just go back to the way they were before Keanu's appearance. His interview had opened up a new way of thinking, not just for the audience, but for the hosts themselves. And even if they didn't all agree with his approach, they couldn't ignore the impact he had left behind. The day after the interview aired, Keanu made his way to the studio again for another appearance on a different talk show. The contrast was stark. The hosts on this show were much more willing to dive into gossip, rumors, and personal questions. But Keanu, ever the calm presence, once again answered with the same grace and thoughtfulness that had captured the hearts of so many on The View. After the second appearance, as Keanu walked out of the studio, a reporter approached him for a comment. "Keanu," the reporter asked, "what was going through your mind when you were on The View? When Joy Behar pressed you about kindness, how did you keep so calm?" Keanu smiled, as he always did when confronted with such questions. "It wasn't about keeping calm," he said. "It was about staying true to myself. Kindness isn't something you do when it's easy. It's what you do when things get tough." It was a simple answer, but it was the kind of answer that people had come to expect from Keanu, genuine, without pretense. And once again, people found themselves nodding in agreement. The buzz around the interview continued to grow, but the impact of that one exchange went deeper than the headlines or the social media posts. It made people pause and ask themselves, what if responding with kindness was actually the strongest thing you could do? What if, in a world that often rewards conflict, choosing peace was the most powerful act of all? Keanu Reeves had, in his own quiet way, made a statement, not by raising his voice, but by choosing not to raise it at all. And for many, that was exactly the lesson they needed to hear. After the storm of media attention surrounding Keanu's interview on The View, things began to settle down. The initial buzz started to fade, but the ripples from that one conversation remained in the background of many people's minds. For Keanu, it was back to business as usual, though in his case, business was rarely usual. He had a way of existing in the world that was different from most people in the spotlight. While other celebrities raced to remain relevant or keep up with the whirlwind of media cycles, Keanu lived in a way that almost seemed detached from the fame and noise around him. But even Keanu couldn't escape the growing curiosity about his personal life, his philosophy, and the way he viewed the world. People wanted more of the real Keanu, the man behind the calm exterior. They wanted to know how he navigated the pressures of fame while staying grounded. They wanted to know what made him tick. A few weeks after the View appearance, Keanu found himself sitting down for another interview, this time with a much smaller outlet. The setting was relaxed, a small coffee shop in the city where the interview would be less formal, more intimate. There was no audience here, no cameras flashing in the background, just a quiet space where Keanu could talk freely without the pressure of a big studio production. The interviewer, a young journalist with a passion for storytelling, had been looking forward to this moment for weeks. They exchanged pleasantries, and then the conversation took a natural turn. The interviewer, eager but respectful, asked Keanu how he felt about the overwhelming attention he had received after his The View appearance. Keanu, who had been stirring his coffee slowly, looked up and smiled. "You know, it's strange," he said thoughtfully. "I've always tried to keep my life private, but it seems like people are interested in how I live, how I think, and I guess that's just the way things are now." The interviewer nodded, clearly intrigued. "But you didn't react the way most people would. You didn't defend yourself or get upset when Joy pushed you on the kindness thing. It was like you just stayed calm. Was that intentional?" Keanu leaned back in his chair, his hands still resting gently on the table. "I didn't feel the need to defend myself. I wasn't trying to win anything. The thing is, we all have our moments, our weaknesses, and our strengths. If we spend all our time trying to convince people of our worth, then we're missing out on the quiet strength that comes with just being who we are." The words were simple, but they carried weight. It was clear that Keanu was someone who valued authenticity above all else. He wasn't interested in pretending to be something he wasn't, especially when the world around him was constantly shifting between perceptions and judgments. "Do you ever feel like the world puts too much pressure on people to be something they're not?" the interviewer asked. Keanu thought for a moment, then nodded. "Absolutely. I think we all feel that pressure, in different ways. Fame amplifies it, but even outside of the spotlight, people are always trying to meet expectations, whether it's from society, family, or even themselves. It's exhausting, but I've found that the more we try to fit into a mold, the further we get from who we really are. And the truth is, no one can tell you who you are except you. The conversation drifted into deeper waters, touching on topics like personal growth, the difficulty of letting go of past mistakes, and the importance of staying true to one's values. Keanu spoke with a quiet passion, sharing personal anecdotes and reflections on life that seemed simple but carried layers of wisdom. Life isn't about being perfect, Keanu said with a small smile. It's about showing up, trying to do the right thing and accepting that we're all flawed. That's the beauty of it. We don't need to pretend to have it all together. The mess is where the magic happens. The interviewer listened, captivated by Keanu's openness. It was clear that Keanu wasn't just a celebrity talking about his career or promoting his latest project. He was a man who had lived through his own struggles and had come out the other side with a mindset that valued kindness, patience, and understanding. After the interview wrapped up, the journalist thanked him for his time, feeling a sense of gratitude for being able to speak with someone who had such a grounded perspective. Keanu, as always, was humble and kind, offering a sincere handshake before leaving the coffee shop. Back in the hustle of his daily life, Keanu returned to his routine. He spent time with his friends, kept up with his projects, and continued to enjoy the simple pleasures that grounded him. But something had shifted within him, too. The reaction to his appearance on The View had confirmed something he had always known, that the way we interact with one another matters. The way we listen, the way we engage, the way we choose to respond to the world around us, had a deeper impact than we often realized. One evening, Keanu sat quietly in his favorite chair at home, reflecting on the whirlwind that had followed his TV appearance. He thought about Joy Behar, the way she had pressed him, the way she had pushed him to react in a way that he wasn't willing to. And he thought about how, in the end, that calmness had resonated with so many people. It was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stay true to yourself, regardless of what others expect or demand. And though Keanu never sought out fame or the spotlight, he had learned that by remaining authentic, by staying grounded in his own beliefs, he could touch the lives of others in ways he never imagined. As time passed, Keanu's approach to life continued to resonate with those who had followed him for years. He wasn't a perfect person, far from it, but his willingness to remain genuine, to listen more than he spoke, and to approach others with empathy and understanding made him stand out in a world that often seemed to value the loudest voices over the most thoughtful ones. The conversation that started on The View sparked more than just media buzz. It sparked a shift in how people thought about themselves, how they approached conflict, and how they interacted with the world. Keanu had quietly reminded everyone that there was power in silence, strength in kindness, and a profound impact in simply being yourself. And as the months went on, Keanu continued to live his life the way he always had, without the need for validation or applause, but with a quiet purpose that spoke louder than any words ever could. The media, of course, moved on to the next headline, and the buzz surrounding the interview faded. But the lessons that Keanu had imparted lived on, not just in the minds of the viewers who had witnessed the interview, but in the hearts of anyone who had ever felt the weight of expectations or the pressure to conform. For Keanu, the true test was never about how the world viewed him. It was about how he viewed the world, and how he could live with peace and purpose in a world that often seemed anything but peaceful. And as he moved through his days, one thoughtful step at a time, it was clear that Keanu Reeves had, in his own way, created a ripple effect that would continue to touch lives for years to come. Months had passed since Keanu Reeves's unexpected moment on The View, and although the media had long moved on to the next viral headline, the impact of that quiet encounter lingered. In interviews, on social media, and even in casual conversations between strangers, Keanu's appearance had sparked something deeper than a simple celebrity appearance. It had started a conversation about kindness, patience, and how people could navigate a world that seemed determined to push them to their limits. Keanu, however, remained largely unaffected by the continued discussions. His life continued to unfold in the quiet, unassuming way it always had. The fame, the interviews, the questions, they never seemed to change him. He continued to work, to give of himself in the ways that mattered most to him, and to live his life in a way that felt true to who he was. One morning, Keanu found himself walking through a bustling city street in New York. He had an event to attend later in the day, but for now, he simply enjoyed the walk. It was a part of his routine that grounded him, just walking among people unnoticed for the most part. That was one of the things he cherished most about his life. Despite the fame, there were still moments when he could just be a regular person, moving through the world without the weight of his celebrity. As he strolled through the crowd, a few people recognized him, but they didn't rush over, didn't swarm him like they might have with other stars. Instead, there was a quiet recognition, a subtle nod from some, a respectful smile from others. It was as if they knew who he was, but they also understood the importance of respecting his space. This, in many ways, felt like the ideal interaction for Keanu, the acknowledgement without the intrusion. But then, as he was waiting at a crosswalk, a woman stopped beside him. She didn't immediately speak. She just glanced at him for a moment, her eyes bright but filled with a mixture of curiosity and wonder. After a pause, she smiled. "You're Keanu, right?" she asked softly. He turned to face her, offering his trademark warm smile. "Yes, I am," he said, his voice calm and genuine. "I just wanted to say thank you," she continued, her voice a little hesitant but full of sincerity. "Your interview on The View, it really made me think. I've been going through a tough time lately, and when I saw how you handled the situation with Behar, it made me realize something. You didn't react like I thought you would. You stayed calm and you didn't try to fight back. It made me think maybe I don't have to fight everything either." Keanu listened, genuinely moved by her words. He didn't feel the need to respond immediately. He understood that moments like these were rare. People didn't often stop him on the street to tell him about the ways his words had impacted their lives. But when they did, it was a reminder of the quiet power of simple moments. "It's not always easy," Keanu said after a beat. "But sometimes stepping back is the hardest and the most important thing to do. Life isn't always about winning. It's about being true to who you are, even when the world pushes you in a different direction." The woman's face softened and she nodded. "I'm trying to remember that," she said quietly. "Thank you." With a smile, Keanu nodded, then watched as she walked away, disappearing into the crowd. It wasn't the first time someone had thanked him for his words or his actions, but each time it felt like a new lesson, a reminder of how important it was to live authentically, to show up as yourself, not just for your own sake, but for others too. As Keanu continued his walk, the weight of the interaction stayed with him. It wasn't a grand moment, but it was significant. Sometimes the smallest moments held the most meaning. The conversation had been simple, just a brief exchange between two strangers in a crowded city. But in those few minutes, they had shared something meaningful, something that transcended words. Later that day, Keanu attended the event he had planned to go to, a charity gala supporting mental health initiatives. It was a cause close to his heart, one that he had supported for years. The event was filled with well-known faces, but Keanu was more interested in the cause than the glamorous setting. After the speeches and the fundraising efforts, he found himself talking to a young woman who had been moved by the evening's presentation. She seemed hesitant at first, unsure of what to say. But after a few moments, she spoke up. "I just wanted to say that I've been following your work for years and not just your films. I admire how you handle things, especially after seeing how you dealt with the situation on The View. You're always so calm, and I've tried to learn from that. It's like you know how to keep perspective no matter what's going on around you." Keanu looked at her with a slight smile, grateful for her words. "I try to," he said. "But it's not always easy. The world can be a pretty chaotic place, and we all have our moments. The key is remembering that how we react in those moments can shape everything." The conversation went on for a while, touching on a range of topics, from the importance of mental health to the way society often underestimated the power of simply being present for someone. It was a refreshing change of pace for Keanu. In an industry that often focused on superficial topics, conversations like these felt grounding. They reminded him of the deeper things in life, the things that really mattered. As the evening drew to a close and Keanu prepared to leave, he reflected on the many conversations he had had over the years, both in public and private. There was one thing he had learned for sure. People were hungry for authenticity. They wanted real connections, not just sound bites and scripted lines. The more he stayed true to himself, the more people seemed to respond. Not because he was a celebrity, but because he was willing to show up as his true self, flaws and all. The next day, the phone calls and emails started coming in, as they always did after a high-profile event. Media outlets wanted interviews, fans sent messages, and the world continued to ask for more of the Keanu they had come to know. But Keanu was always careful about how much of himself he shared. He knew that the world was full of noise, and while he was grateful for the opportunities his fame had brought him, he also understood the importance of keeping some things private. Some parts of himself were for him alone, and that was okay. In the days that followed, Keanu returned to his quieter life. He worked on his projects, spent time with those who mattered most to him, and kept a balance between the demands of his career and the need to stay grounded. The world could continue its cycle of headlines and viral moments, but for Keanu, it was always about finding peace in the midst of it all. One evening, as he sat in his favorite spot at home, reflecting on the events of the past few months, he received a letter. It was from a fan, one that he had never met but who had been following his career for years. The letter was handwritten, a rare thing in a world dominated by digital messages. The letter spoke of how Keanu's example of kindness, humility, and patience had inspired the writer to make a change in their own life. They had been struggling with personal demons, unsure of how to face the challenges they were up against. But after watching Keanu on The View, after seeing how he handled the pressure, they had decided to make a change. They had chosen to stop fighting against everything that came their way, and instead learn to face life with a sense of calm and understanding. Keanu sat quietly for a while after reading the letter. He didn't often respond to fan letters, but something about this one felt different. It wasn't about praise or admiration. It was about the real human connection that had been sparked by a simple moment of honesty. So he decided to write back. The letter he wrote was short, but it was sincere. He thanked the person for their kind words and told them to keep believing in themselves. He shared that life wasn't always easy, but it was worth it if they stayed true to who they were, and he wished them the best on their journey. Keanu knew that his impact wasn't about the spotlight, the fame, or even the fame itself. It was about the small moments, the quiet exchanges, the genuine connections that could change someone's life. That was where the real value was. And in those moments, he found the deepest meaning of all. As he sealed the letter and sent it off, he couldn't help but smile. Life had a way of surprising him, and though he had never sought to change the world, it seemed the world was changing around him little by little, one small act of kindness at a time,